Almost every digitized photograph can benefit from some sharpening, even if you don't notice at first that the image is soft. I suggest that you sharpen after you've resized a copy of the file in the size that you're going to post it on the web, and before you optimize the file in JPEG format. The reason to sharpen after you resize is that the sharpening settings that you choose will vary depending on the size of the file. Here I have a layered PSD file that I've already resized for my website. Over in the Layers panel, you can see that I've added several adjustment layers and a retouching layer. I'd like to keep these layers in the file, but sharpening will affect only one layer. So before I sharpen, I'm going to make a composite of all of these layers and sharpen the composite. I'm working in the Color and Tone workspace. I'll click on the top layer here, and then I'm going to go to the panel menu at the right side of the Layers panel, hold down the Option key on the Mac, that's the Alt key on the PC, as I select Merge Visible. And that creates a new layer here that's a composite of the content of all the layers below. I'm going to rename that layer Sharpen, and now with the Sharpen layer selected, I'm going to apply a Smart Filter. I'll go up to the Filter menu and down to Convert for Smart Filters. And I'll click OK. Now if I look at the Sharpen layer, I see that there's a Smart Object icon on that layer. Converting for smart filters allows me to apply a sharpening filter in a way that doesn't directly change the pixels on this layer, and in a way that will allow me to come back later and re-edit my sharpening settings. Now I can come up to the Filter menu and go down to the Sharpen category. I'd suggest either using Smart Sharpen or Unsharp Mask. I'm going to use Smart Sharpen because it offers this nice big preview for you to see, and also because it offers more settings than Unsharp Mask. But it does work in a very similar way to the Unsharp Mask filter. By default, the Basic button is selected, and that offers the settings that you see here. I'm going to leave the Remove setting at Gaussian Blur. I'm also going to leave More Accurate checked. This control was designed to give more accurate blur removal. If you're working on a very large file for print, this can slow things down, but on a small file like this one for the web, you won't notice any effect, so I'll leave More Accurate checked. Now I'm going to come to the Amount and Radius sliders. I'm going to exaggerate those so that I can show you how sharpening works. I'm going to drag Amount all the way over, and I'm going to increase Radius to a larger number than I normally would use. And now you can see that the image in the preview is very crispy looking. I'm going to zoom in by clicking the plus button underneath the preview. Now normally I would not zoom in to this percentage when I was sharpening, but I want to show you what sharpening does. The sharpening filters look for edges of high contrast. For example, the black of the surfer's pants against the white of the wave. At those high contrast edges, the filter makes the light pixels lighter and the dark pixels darker, and that gives the illusion of sharpness. You can control that effect with the Amount and the Radius sliders. The Amount slider affects how light or how dark those edge pixels will become. So keep your eye on those pixels as I move the Amount slider way down to more like 90, and you can see that the lightening and darkening edge effect is much more subtle. The Radius slider determines how many pixels out from those high contrast edges will be affected by this sharpening. I usually keep the radius pretty low. I'm going to go maybe down to 0.7 here. And now you can see there's just a thin line along the edge of light pixels and dark pixels. I notice that there's a halo of light pixels around the surfer's head, and the lightening is particularly noticeable along his right leg. The good news is that with Smart Sharpen, you can control the amount of sharpening in the highlights separately from the amount of sharpening in the dark areas. To do that, I'm going to click on the Advanced button here, and that offers the Shadow tab and a Highlight tab here. And I'm actually going to go back to 100% view. I can still see that there's a little halo of white around the surfer's head and along his right leg. So I'm going to drag the Fade Amount slider up, maybe to around 15. That adjusts the amount of sharpening in the highlights. I don't want to go too far because then I'll also lose my sharpening in the rest of the highlights in the water here. I'm also going to increase the Tonal Width slider, which controls the range of highlights that are affected by this Fade Amount setting. So I'm going to drag that up until I see the white line along the surfer's right leg start to disappear. I think that looks a little better, and I'll leave the radius setting as it is. Now I'm going to click OK to accept these sharpening settings. And I'll do a before and after comparison in my image. That's how it was, and that's how it is. If I wanted to make a change, I can always go back into the Smart Sharpen filter because I had the foresight to make this into a smart filter. So I can double-click on Smart Sharpen, and that reopens the dialog box. I could go back to the Sharpen tab, for example, and I could sharpen a little bit more. And click OK. The other advantage of having used smart filters is that a smart filter comes with a layer mask of its own. And I can use that layer mask to target exactly the area that's going to be sharpened. To do that, I'm going to go over to the toolbox and I'm going to select the brush tool. I've got a pretty large 200 pixel soft brush selected, and I have black as my foreground color in the toolbox. I'm going to come over to the Layers panel, and I'm going to click on the layer mask here on the Smart Filter layer. And then, with black and a soft brush, I'll paint over the areas of the photo that I want to protect from the sharpening that I just applied. So I'm going all around the edges so that the main thing that's sharpened is the surfer himself in the middle, and I haven't painted there. I'm going to Option click on that mask so that you can see that I've painted around the edges with black. All of those areas will be protected from the sharpening settings. The areas that are white will have the sharpening applied, and those that are gray will have a lesser amount of sharpening. I'll Option click to come back to normal view. So as you've seen, sharpening can really add some punch to your photographs, and if you make use of the features that I just showed you, you can use sharpening to draw the viewer's eye directly to the subject. So don't forget to sharpen all your photographs before you optimize them for the web.